It's why I'm proud of the fact that we've lowered the burden in our state, and most of the states that have been successful in lowering unemployment and raising employment have done so by lowering the burden of hardworking taxpayers. Now, sometimes people in my state who don't always agree with me question why my obsession with lowering taxes. We've lowered them $2 billion on individuals, on employers, and on property in our state. They say, why are you so obsessed with lowering the tax burden? I say I have a simple way of explaining this. Tonette knows this. On February 6th last month, Tonette and I celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary. She's probably amazed that she hung with me that long, but particularly after the last 4 years. But I made a critical mistake not long after we were married. I went to Kohl's department stores and I bought something at the price it was marked at. Right? So now I've been trained well. I know after many years of practice that if I'm going to go buy a shirt, I go to that rack that says it was $29.99 and now it's $19.99. And then I get the Sunday insert out with the little scratch off and I take it up to the cash register along with my Kohl's credit card. And then I take the mailer that we get, because we shop there a lot, and sometimes it's 15 or 20%, and if we're really lucky, it's 30%, right? We're really lucky, we get the 30% off, and then we pull out the Kohl's cash and we lay it on the counter, and next thing you know, they're paying me to buy that shirt, right? Right? Little side on this, I actually was wearing a sweater yesterday. I didn't want to wear the same color for 2 days, so I actually stopped by Kohl's and bought this sweater in the rack where it's 70% off, and we paid $1 for it with our Kohl's cash along the way, so living the high life. But I say, so how does a company like Kohl's make money? They make it off of value, right? They make it off value. They could charge $29.99 for that shirt, and a few people would buy it, or they could lower the price, broaden the value, and next thing you know, all of us are buying things at a place like that. I call that the Kohl's curve, because you know what? That's like your money. It's the taxpayer's money. I could charge you a higher rate, and a few of you could afford it, or I could lower the rates, broaden the base, have more people participate in the economy, and that's the way you fuel the economy going forward, right? Growth, which we need to do more of, and that means doing things like repealing Obamacare and actually having an energy policy and doing all the things that fuel this economy going forward. But in addition to growth, there's reform. And think about the contrast here. You know, this president and his allies tend to measure success in government by how many people are dependent on the government, by how many people are on Medicaid and food stamps and unemployment. We should measure success by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent on the government, right? We understand that true freedom and prosperity doesn't come from the mighty hand of the government. It comes from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies to the dignity that's born of work. Think about it. If you don't remember anything else, I love pointing this out. When I was a kid growing up in that small town of Delaware, I don't ever remember one of my classmates saying to me, hey, Scott, someday when we grow up, I want to become dependent on the government, right? Nobody signed my yearbook, dear Scott, good luck becoming dependent on the government. And yet somehow that's acceptable in Washington. And I got to tell you, over the years, I've met some amazing people who've come here from other places around the world. Some really amazing people. And I wish my kids would hear their stories more often, because to a person, the ones that I have met who've been successful small business owners today are people who tell me the reason they came here was not to become dependent on the government. The reason they came to America was because it was one of the last places left in the world where it doesn't matter what class you were born into. It doesn't matter what your parents did for a living. In America, you can be and do anything you want. The opportunity is equal to all of us, but the outcome should be up to each and every one of us. That's something I learned a long time ago. My father was a preacher. My mom was a secretary part-time, raised my brother and I. My grandparents on one side were farmers, where my mom didn't have indoor plumbing until she went off to junior high. My grandfather, my grandpa Walker, my dad's side, was a machinist for 40 years. From all my parents and grandparents, I didn't inherit fame or fortune. What I got was something more important. I got the belief that in America, if you work hard, and you play by the rules, you should be able to do or be anything you want. That has slipped away, and we need to restore that back again in America. So I think one of the best ways we reform this federal government is by taking power out of Washington and sending it back to the states. You send it back in big areas, right? That's the way we need government that's more efficient and more effective and ultimately more accountable to the hardworking taxpayers. And then the last thing I tell you, beyond just growth and reform, something that's heavy on my heart these days is safety. Safety. You know, I don't call it national security, I call it safety. Because when you see those images of the Jordanian who was burned alive in a cage, when you see the beheadings of the Christians from Egypt or others from around the world, I got to tell you, that makes me worry, not just for myself and my country, it makes me worry for my children and your children, anyone else who would ever dare to travel around this world. And that's not right. And that's not right. And what frustrates me is we've got a president who draws a line in the sand and somehow allows people to cross it. A president who calls ISIS the JV squad, who calls Yemen a success story, who calls Iran a place we can do business with, whose former Secretary of State gave Russia a reset button. A reset button. Think about that. We need a commander-in-chief in this country who stands up and once and for all says our biggest threat is radical Islamic terrorism, and we will do whatever it takes to weed it out anywhere in the world. We need a president who will do whatever it takes, who understands that we have an ally in Israel, we should start acting like it. Who understands that radical Islamic terrorism is like a virus, and if you don't take it out entirely, it's like a virus in your computer, it will keep coming back. And I don't know about all of you, but I'd rather take the fight to them than wait till it comes to us on American soil. And so I'm worried about where this country's headed. And I'm worried about our position in the world. But I am an optimist. And I believe just as we have in the past, we will rise up to this occasion again. You see, years ago, I mentioned I grew up in a small town. Our family didn't have a lot of money. And so even though I loved history, I loved our founders, I thought of them like superheroes, bigger than life. I never had a chance to go to Washington or Philadelphia or New York or anywhere else. And so not long after I was elected governor in the fall of 2011, Tonette and I got a chance to go to Philadelphia, and we were there for a governor's conference, and we got up early in the morning, and I wanted to go over to Independence Hall. We went by the Liberty Bell, and we went into Independence Hall, and if you've ever been there, you know it's not very big. And I got in there as someone who thought of our founders as superheroes, bigger than life. I thought to myself, man, I'm going to be blown away. And I got up there early in the morning, and I looked, as we looked at the tables, the desks, and the chairs, particularly the chair up in the front where Washington sat with the half-rising sun, and I thought to myself, these are just like the chairs and desks we sit in today. They're just a little older. And it dawned on me. These were ordinary people. These were ordinary people who did something quite extraordinary. These are people who didn't just risk their political careers. These are people who didn't just risk their business ventures. These were patriots who risked their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today. Moments like that are amazing to me because what they do is restore into me the belief in the American spirit, because it reminds me that not just in those moments, but all throughout our history, in moments of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, what has made America exceptional, what has made us arguably the greatest country in the history of the world, has been in moments of crisis like that, there have been men and women of courage who've been willing to stand up and think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own political futures. I tell you here today, let this be one of those moments in history. Let this be a time in history where we can look back and tell future generations what we did to make America great again. Thank you for the chance to come on out. God bless you. We'll be back many more times.